Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News America. Today is Sunday, August 3rd, 2025, and we're going to be looking at the Kalshi odds map for the 2026 Senate. Election Time News, your one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Make sure to subscribe below for more content like this about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. Also, make sure to follow the Substack, Threads, Instagram, and X, where we keep you up to date on news on all of those platforms. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So now on the video, here we have our blank Senate map, and we're going to be comparing the odds. I'm going to be mapping the odds all on one map. But to start things off, let's look at the overall scenario. Donald Trump's approval rating is the lowest of any president recorded at this point in time. As of right now, Obama was +9, Biden was +4. His first term was -14. He is now currently -15. And so what we have here is that he's underwater on every single issue, including his leading one of immigration, where he is under by about 7 points. He is also losing every single, he is also underwater even amongst 2024 voters in every single state that he flipped from Joe Biden's win in 2020. However, there's only one state that he won all three times that he is underwater with 2024 voters, that being North Carolina. But with all voters, he is underwater in almost every single state, including solid red states like South Dakota, Montana, Nebraska, Mississippi, and Florida, and including some semi-red states like Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio. So as of right now, it's looking relatively difficult for him to be able to carry the Republican Party to victory, especially considering how poor they typically end up doing. Well, not specifically the Republicans, but the party out of power. As of right, continually, generally, the party out of power doesn't do that well in the midterms, much more so in the House than anything else, as the House seat net is generally negative, quite so in 2018 during Donald Trump's first term. But the Senate is a bit more nuanced, and so the last two midterms, the party in power actually did gain a seat or two in the Senate. As you can see in 2018, even though Democrats did relatively well, winning most of the competitive races, Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, they did lose Florida, the one main competitive race they lost, and they also did lose Indiana and Missouri. That was due to a heavy right trend since 2012 in these states, and also narrowly lost North Dakota by 10.8%. They won the total vote, though, in the Senate by a whopping 20 percentage points. They obviously did not do that in 2020, as they don't have California or New York to weigh that heavy Democratic vote. They only have Massachusetts. And basically, the entire way they'd be able to win the popular vote this year would be a very, very strong performance in Texas. Now let's start looking at the overall map. What are we going to be looking at here? So first off, okay, the direction of the country, -12.5, it is continuing to drop. The generic congressional vote is continuing to rise. This is different than the predicted Senate vote, though. And so now we are getting into the odds. Looking at the races in 2020, the map is essentially the exact same. But what we have here is we have a special election in Ohio and in Florida, and we do not have a special election in Georgia or in Arizona. So there are, in fact, still exactly there are still the exact same amount of seats that there were in 2020 as you trade the special elections in each. The special election in Ohio is for the remainder of Vice President J.D. Vance's term, and in Florida, the remainder of Secretary Marco Rubio's term. Both of those have unelected incumbents. To start things off, let's just go in order for the Kalshi markets to make things easiest. The Republicans are heavily favored to hold on to the Senate next year. 71% chance to 29%. It was a bit higher back before the collapse in April. It was around 80%, dropped down to 70, but has been sitting around 70% since then. So they're not necessarily in any crisis mode right now. But the highest traded by volume market is by far Texas, where we have a relatively strong chance that the Republicans will hold it, whether or not the incumbent John Cornyn will be the one to hold that seat is the question. That's a separate market. And so right now we're looking at an 80% chance of holding that. But of course, since it is just under 80%, that would still be a lean margin, not by much, but it will in fact be a lean margin on the map. Looking next, we do have the race in Nebraska, where the Republicans are holding a 79% chance of victory. The Democrats are only at 3, and that's because of the independency of Dan Osborne, who is, in theory, the remaining 16% chance. But as of right now, it does still show an 80% chance of victory in the state. It's only 79, though. That is going to be another identical margin to Texas. That's going to be a lean margin on the map. Next up, we have Wisconsin. That's actually not going to be until 2028. That's the race with Ron Johnson. Montana, we do have a race in Montana. Daines only won by 10 in 2020 against against popular Democratic ex-governor Steve Bullock, but he did still win by 10, which is why most likely, even if current governor Andy Beshear ran in Kentucky, he would likely still lose. In Montana, we're looking currently at an 86% chance of victory for the Republicans. This is a solid, likely margin, so that will be able to be a relatively strong chance of victory there. North Carolina, this is a relatively shocking one. The markets have a 3 to they have a 2-to-1 chance of flipping, and not even as of recently when Roy Cooper announced that he was going to be running, but instead back in that collapse in April, where we currently have 67% chance of victory for the Democrats, which is a shocking, relatively strong, lean chance here on the map. 2 and 3 chance of victory. Ohio, the Democrats aren't as lucky. They are not predicted to flip this seat. 71% chance to 29%, which is a relatively strong lean margin. Continuing, going in Maine, we have almost a perfect split, 51-49. Susan Collins with a very narrow advantage. She actually gained it back after being behind at the end of June. There's not much to say about this. It is a perfect toss-up on the map right now. It will stay gray as of right now, as there's no real way to give any real advantage to one side or the other based on that. Senate race in Kentucky, 90% for the Republicans. This is going to be a stronger side, likely margin. Senate race in Georgia, 73% chance for the Democrats. This is going to be another lean margin for the Democratic Party here. These are the two main seats that are going to be watched all cycle long. This race in Iowa, this is another interesting one. Republicans are sitting with a 74% chance of victory. We have another lean margin on the map here. Next up, we have the state of New Hampshire, where Democrats are sitting with a very comfortable 88% chance of victory. It's going to be a likely margin here, 88% chance. That's actually higher than for being such a competitive state, that's actually relatively high, even though Jeanne Shaheen is retiring. Chris Pappas is a relatively strong candidate in his own right and will potentially be able to hold on to this seat, and the markets appear to agree. The Senate race in Florida, 89% chance of victory here. That's going to be another likely margin, but relatively close. And actually, just for simplicity here, I'm going to quickly bump the margins to 90% for safe. That only does change that one race, though, but that's going to help distinguish that. It's going to be 80 to 90% chance it's going to be likely. Then with that, we move to the state of Alaska, where we have 86% chance of victory for the Republican Party. That's going to be a relatively strong state there. Not that unlikely they're going to be able to pull that off unless Mary Peltola jumps into the race, but most likely she is running for governor instead, so Dan Sullivan will likely end up winning that seat. State of Michigan. This is a relatively competitive one. Donald Trump won it by 1.25 points in 2024. However, and Gary Peters is retiring, but as of right now, the markets are giving the Democrats a 75% chance of victory in the state, which is relatively impressive as of right now. It's going to be another lean seat on the map. South Carolina, 92% chance of victory. That's a solid seat. There's an incumbent there, not much expected. Otherwise, Virginia, another incumbency advantage there, relatively popular one in 2020 alongside Joe Biden. He won by 10.1. Warner overperformed Biden by 2 percentage points with that already impressive margin. In Arizona, the Democrats are actually given, that's actually for a 2028 race. In Minnesota, an almost 90% chance for the Democrats, just under those. So that will be a likely margin. Tina Smith has retired, but Democrats still generally have the advantage as they have relatively strong candidates that are lined up to run for that seat. New Mexico, the Democrats, this is actually a safe seat according to the markets, 93% chance of victory for the Democrats. Kansas, a safe seat mirroring that 92% margin in Kansas for the Republicans, relatively going to be a potentially lower margin as expected. Can be seen here, relatively bit of an underperformer. He only won by 11.4 in 2020. Could be expected to be a bluer environment than that. You end up with a 7.3 PVI, but then you go and subtract 5.9. You actually overperformed by 1.87, but 5.9 war rating against him is going to definitely hurt a bit. So that could end up changing up the race, but still, the markets say there's a 92% chance of victory there. In Ohio, the Republicans are given a 2/3 odds to win the race here. John Husted, the unelected incumbent, is likely to win re-election. We already have. There's two markets for it. 67 and 71, they're relatively on point, though. Same thing in Florida. Pennsylvania, that's 2028. Maybe this is 2028. There's a lot of markets here. So, no, 2027. All right, so that's 2028, though there is no election here. Arkansas, we have, that's a 2028 election. Colorado, this may be a 2028 election as well. No, it is not. Yes, it is. Okay. There is, in fact, an election. Hickenlooper is running for re-election here, but quite a few of these are, in fact, 2028 elections, so they're not all in order. So to start things off here again, we're going to be looking at, there's still New Jersey. There's still quite a few more in the Northeast. So here's one for New Jersey. The race in New Jersey, 2026, the incumbent Cory Booker with a 96% chance of victory here. That's a very strong margin headed into the election. 96% chance, relatively popular. He won by a good bit prior as well. Capito expected to win, 96% chance of victory in West Virginia, a very strong red state, not unexpected by any means. In Delaware, we have another incumbency here in Chris Coons, 97% chance of victory, most likely not really any, not much traded here, but that's still going to likely be a very strong, safe state. We have Illinois. I don't think there's actually, there's no race in Washington, so that's not right, but here we are. In Illinois, Dick Durbin is retiring, but that's still expected to stay a safe blue seat. The problem with these other races is that there's not really any trading volume, so it's not going to be close to as more accurate, but a lot of these are very safe seats already. So the ones that we're looking at left aren't necessarily expected to be competitive by any means, as is. We have Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and then for the Republicans, we have Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota. The only three that I could see being somewhat competitive are Oregon, Colorado, and Mississippi, most likely not Oregon. But that does mean that the Republicans are expected to hold the Senate majority. Mississippi, the only reason that it is competitive is because Hyde Smith is almost a chronic underperformer. Won first election by 7.3 against SB in 2018. In their rematch, still only won by 10, and that's in a state where the PVI is 11. So that's quite a bit of an underperformance there. And the war rating is minus 9.5. So this is actually a bit of a pickup that could be unexpected for the Democrats, but more likely than not, it's still going to stay red. Probably by about an 85% chance or so. And Colorado, Hickenlooper is a very popular incumbent. Said this is going to be his last term, but still, as of right now, expected to win re-election by a strong amount, probably around New Mexico-esque odds there, meaning that there's a toss-up race in Maine, and we did see that Susan Collins did have the advantage, but purely a toss-up race as of right now, so it's 51-49, meaning the map right now is 51 to 48 to 1. The Democrats with one pickup in North Carolina, and a toss-up race in Maine. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe again if you have not already, and have a fantastic rest of your day.